Well, hello everybody. I think we're ready to get started. Thanks for being here. My name is Horst Stepp. I'm part of Gail's research team here at the ARF. I want to welcome the speakers who we're going to meet in a couple of minutes. I just want to give a little introduction to put this a little bit into context with the ARF's How Advertising Works Today project and the issues that we're focused on. We are very, very much listening to our members and trying to figure out what the most pressing issues are for the industry. And that led us to this project that we call How Advertising Works. And our goal is to come up with what we like to call some ground truths, some new insights about how advertising works today and how we can achieve better advertising. So some of you probably attended our AM conference or our Rethink conference this year, but some of you probably did not. So for those who did not, we have a quick little summary here. And again, it really puts the presentation that you're about to see into context. So our project sort of had two parts to it. One, cross-platform ROI, as the name says, was kind of focused on return on investment. And we really tried to generate research that very much focused on this particular issue in order to address these kind of problems, which are really, really, really important, especially to the CEOs, and also, of course, to the planners. And how did we get there? How do we generate these ground truths? Well, it was sort of two different approaches that merged. One, we reviewed 80 years of research. And of course, we focused on the more recent research. But what we wanted to see is what are sort of the principles of advertising that have been established? What does the new research say about that? And where are the most pressing questions that we need to address by doing new original research? So the other part, the really important part for us, of course, was conducting new research, in this case, single source experiments, surveys, marketing mix modeling that came up with insights on these questions. What are the contributions of different platforms to ROI? What is the optimal mix, and so on. The one on the right, which is sort of my baby, focused on cross-platform interactions and really on understanding what's behind the ROI findings, and really get an understanding about the consumer's response to advertising. Or as we like to say, how does each medium build brands in the brain? Because ultimately that's how it starts, right? Consumers have to absorb advertising and memorize it, and react to it in order to then actually purchase, or maybe not. And again, the goal here was to identify strategies to optimize cross-platform effects. So we're very, very much focused on today's cross-platform world. Now, the method here was very similar. On the one hand, we reviewed all of this existing research, but also a lot of new learning. So we did look, again, at 80 years of research, but we, again, paid particularly attention to more recent research, including neuroscience methodologies, neuro research that would help us better understand this particular issue, namely how do consumers respond to advertising. And we did, in fact, conduct two brand new neuroscience experiments to look at specific questions. I'm actually excited that one of the top researchers who was engaged in that particular program, Pranav here from Neural Insight, is part of our group here today, so thank you. And just to give you a quick overview, in all of this research, we kind of recovered what some of you might probably think is obvious. There are tons of different factors that all impact how advertising works and that determine the effects of advertising. There's the medium. It makes a difference whether you see something on television, whether it's on screen, whether it's digital, whether it's on mobile. Obviously, ad formats. Is it a 50? Is it a 30? Is it video? Is it a banner? What is the role of sound? Campaign strategy. How much spending is there? What is the patterns of spending? The content, the context. We just talked about that with Pranav outside. What is the impact of the environment, maybe of premium content? The context of the advertising. What is the effect of clutter? And then, of course, the consumer. What is the right target group? What are the purchase patterns? What is the state of mind of the consumer when they see the ad? Now, if you think about today's discussions, all of these issues have been raised. I think that the medium, where do I put my money? How much money should there be in mobile? How much money on TV? How do I shift the money? Strikes me as probably the most frequent issue that's being discussed. But what our research indicates, and that's why you hear the papers, the presentations you will hear in a few minutes, the one issue that is more decisive than anything else on this chart is creative. That's a factor that unfortunately is not at the center of the industry discussion today. There has been making a big effort to alert people to this particular fact. And there's been research from a couple of years back that reviewed a lot of studies and comparing the influence of media, where is the ad versus the creative strategy, and found that creative is so much more important. And, you know, it's sort of common sense, right? If the ad doesn't work, it doesn't really matter on which medium it is. If the ad doesn't work, it doesn't probably matter that much how much money you spend on bringing it out there. So it is just really essential that you have powerful creative. And so one of the top line findings of this research really is to remind people of the importance of creative. And that, of course, means, again, now we should look at how the consumer reacts. It can be through neuroscience, it can be through other methods, but it's really important to understand how brands are built in the brain. And we have three lessons here. One is cross-platform can outperform single platform if it's done right. And if it's done right, it's got to be unified. The creative across different platforms has to be coordinated. If you run campaigns in silos, somebody does a TV ad, somebody else does something on Twitter, somebody else does a banner on a PC or whatever, and it's not coordinated, bad news. You're throwing money out of the window. And it has to be customized to each platform. And we'll hear some great research about it, some more great research about that particular issue. What we found was that if you do not take advantage of the unique power, the unique qualities of each platform, again, you're wasting money because advertising is not being optimized. Here's an example of one of the studies that we use, comparing the impact of a creative strategy that was not unified, setting that as 100, to one where the creative was unified and customized. The ones that did everything right according to our insight, the impact was 57% greater. So this is not just like playing with a margin. This is a really, really important part. And the reason it's so important, and the reason we are sort of preaching this is this chart here. A lot of advertisers are not doing it. A lot of advertising is done in silos, or people have a TV campaign, and then they just use a TV ad for all of the media, and they do stuff that might save them some money, or we think it does not optimize the effectiveness of advertising. So going from those findings, which were first presented at Rethink, which was in March of this year, we did some additional research that looked at this particular issue. What are the optimal sequences on platforms? Does it make a difference whether you start your campaign on TV or should you start it on another medium? A lot of advertisers have told us, a lot of agency people have told us that TV should always come first. Well, our research is questioning that. And now going forward for this year and going you know, with the goal of collecting a lot of new research to be presented at Rethink next year, we want to get more insights on execution to the platform and customization. In other words, how can you take advantage of each medium, optimize your research, make it more powerful? And sort of the big headline, I would say, from this research focusing on what is the optimal sequences, that it's really not about the platform. It's really about the creative strategy. And if you have a unified strategy and you customize to each creative platform, it can be that you found a fantastic way, for example, to start out without a phone, or to start with Facebook, or to start with Twitter, and then move to TV, or do some kind of other combination. So I think the headline here is the platform should not determine the strategy. The strategy and the creativity should determine the platform. So we've been telling our audiences and whoever will listen to us, we've been telling our members, this is our advice, these are our insights. Based on the research, we think we can be very, very certain in saying that advertising works, and if you do it right, if you invest the right way, you can build strong brands to become more profitable and more effective. How do you do that? You got to unify creative strategies across platforms so you can benefit from synergy effect. Synergy effect that we also call kicker effect. Secondly, you got to customize the creative to each platform. That means you amplify engagement by adapting to the platform. You're making ads on each platform more effective. In general, you got to innovate to create advertising that provides values to the consumers, because consumers are exposed to an enormous amount of advertising. Much of it is being perceived as interruption and annoyance. Ad blocking is rising. Ad avoidance is rising. So you've got to innovate, and you've got to find new ways to reach consumers in a way that they appreciate and that they pay attention to the ads. And therefore, I think we need to invest in research to find optimal solutions. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to our first guest, who will show you that they did exactly that. They invested in research to show us innovation, and specifically, in this case, to teach us creative element that drive video completion, which obviously is an indicator of engagement and liking there. So please help me welcome Matthew Trakimas from Twitter, where he runs technical vertical research lead. So another researcher. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
I'd really like to thank KRF for having me today. Really excited to share this research, and hopefully it'll fall on that same trend and provide some insights for you to think about in terms of looking at video and optimizing it for the mobile environment. But there we go. So thinking about what's happening in this world, our world is changing. Now, I know what you're thinking. When I say that, you're thinking about continental drift. But whereas continental drift is a slow and patient process over thousands of years, pretty soon we're going to be neighbors with Japan. The shift in mobile that's happening right now is fast and relentless. We've seen such a surge in growth over the past 3 years to mobile video, and all those different ads from programmatic that it's just so much coming at you at once. What do you do? How do you make it work? So for Twitter, when we started looking at this, we wanted to take data, particularly right when we started doing mobile video about a year and a half ago, and try to provide some ground rules, some learnable best practices for brands and how they can activate and what they can use on the platform. And so we partner with Ace Metrics, and we have some insights here to share with you today, which will be pretty cool. So basically what I'm going to take you through is set up what and how we did it, the analysis. We're all researchers here, so I think you'd be interested in that. Usually that gets shoveled in the appendix in most of my other presentations because people just want to see the results. And then we're going to share insights around the viewing behaviors and characteristics we saw, plus a few insights onto the best practices. Does that sound interesting? Heck yeah, that's what I like to hear. So background and methodology. So we took a subset of videos on Twitter. Again, this is just when we started having the promoted video product on the platform. And we looked at videos across what drove a completed view. And then I know there's tons of definitions out there in terms of completed views, so I'll just set the record straight here for you. These are actually completed views. We looked at videos that drove a full completion on the platform, not 3 seconds, not a second, not 2, not 7, not 30. Sound on, sound off didn't factor into this, but we looked at videos that had a completed view, and then we normalized them against impressions, so the amount of advertising investment that was behind them. And we sampled videos across several different verticals, and looked and then teased out to where we saw what drove a video to have more completions versus another, basically breaking out into a classification analysis and working with ACE metrics. And with their syndicated methodology, we kind of pulled out different characteristics. And then from that larger set of videos, we took a subset of those top and bottom performers and so encoded them for characteristics and see, okay, what's driving these videos? What's working? And the first one is getting into video length. So how much time do you think people watch a video on a mobile screen? Any wild guesses?
5 seconds.
5 seconds, maybe. We'll get to that. This is good. You see, a little news. This is a presenter checking in with his audience to make sure you're actually listening to what I'm saying. And it also gives me a moment to collect my thoughts and allows me to look at your beautiful faces. It's a very effective strategy. You should take notes on that. So this first graph. So this is all quartile viewing data across our 167 videos. So it looks like Dr. Seuss made spaghetti, pretty much, right? So our green lines are our top performing videos, red lines, bottom performing, and then we took those average and blue and gray lines to see what happens. And I think when we said 5 seconds you watched that video, it's really interesting. But that decision from the viewer's perspective of when to watch that video happens within the first quartile. Am I in or am I out? But it's amazing once you get over that hurdle, once they make that decision. And again, this is across all different video lengths. So we'll get a little bit more into how it differed by video length. But that first quartile, you get someone in, they're there. And then what do we see? Even in these terrible videos, look at this. Almost, I kind of figure out, 95% of the people said this video was terrible. But then those 5% actually stuck through to 75% of watching the video. And then we saw that much higher rate for the good videos. But even if it's a terrible video, you get over that first decision, you bring them in, they're going to stick around and watch more. And then we actually saw kind of generally even good and poor videos, saw that drop off towards the end of it. But you get them through that first bit, they're going to stick around and end up watching most of your video. And then overall, just again, looking at those averages of what we saw, a good video compared to a bad video, 9 times is drive that completed view. So essentially, when you're pushing your brand out there, trying to share that message, to have that whole video experience, to see that whole story being told, if you can get that first decision made, drive that completed view, you're going to have that whole canvas to work with to drive that impression. So then this is looking at across different video links. And this is actually kind of in line. Who's seen that news stat? It's probably about February of this year. Our attention spans have shrunk to about 9 seconds. We can give concentrated, sustained attention for 9 seconds. So someone did the research. I'm just repeating what they did. So, but what we have here, and then someone compared this, is really Shame of the Earth. That's smaller than a goldfish's attention span, which is apparently 11 seconds. A goldfish is in a bowl, so I'm not really sure what they're staring at most of the time. When we took all the video lengths, looked at by the percentage of viewers, so we'd have the completed views going by quartile, kind of made an assumption, straight line. We actually get about half your viewers for 10 seconds, which is interesting. Regardless of the length of the video, you have about 10 seconds to work with when they're watching that video. And then we see varying trailing off of how they watch it. But you have about 10 seconds to really gain some attention, to get over that hurdle, regardless of video length. That's where that real sweet spot is in terms of making an impression. And then this is so that was all Twitter data. This is taking those videos that we had and then doing it with the ACE metrics panel to survey them across several metrics and seeing where they're kind of performing. And after you go through those several different metrics, relevance, breakthrough, likability, desire, information, change. This is why I brought my wingman skin. It keeps me fresh. But if you take all those aspects together, you generate an overall qualitative score of how they're performing. And so, again, all completed views, but looking at this through ACE metrics methodology, we actually saw our shorter videos didn't really do so hot comparatively. They're a little below average for most of our videos, And then we actually saw higher scores overall across those 7 metrics, or those 7 metrics driving the score for some of our longer format videos. And these are videos that are mostly watched on a mobile device. So it's interesting to see that long format video actually driving a little more quality. But then when you go into it, these were not on Twitter, these are just examples here. But just to give you a sense, there across those 7 dimensions, there's always that one dimension that's really driving the score, contributing the most to it. Kind of what's that signature characteristic? And if you're aware of this Old Spice ad, man riding a horse backwards, part of that whole most interesting man in the world, a lot of that just ridiculously satirical, funny, absurd, super male guy selling beer, alcohol, or some kind of personal CPG product. But this ad, very watchable, very likable, and grabbed your attention. Had a lot of different visuals in it. But so very strong performer, but didn't necessarily change much about the brand, communicate information. Whereas here are the kitchen ads, and these were both, sorry to give context, these were both ads that rated really highly within ACE metrics, top ads, but just doing it very differently. One doing it through entertainment, and then one doing it more through information, communicate, and change. Then we break it again out looking at our ads across those dimensions. So repetition, those short ads, 20 seconds, that's what really did well. Those ads had the responses amongst the panelists. They were very interested in watching these ads again. They were short investment of time, really interesting. And then conversely, not that many people said they wanted to watch a 90-second ad over again. But hopefully there was enough communication presented there that you didn't necessarily need to watch it again unless it was really super interesting. So the repetition happens there with shorter ads. You see a little bit more happening with that attention-grabbing nature of the ads, getting people in, doing something different for them, shaking up their vision, what they're seeing visually, hearing it. And then as we kind of start to shift, going through the ads, we kind of see the longer ads playing up and what's driving their scores. So likability, those short ads, while they're repeatable, you might watch and you'll kind of gain some of those frequency gains, weren't necessarily the most liked. Actually, longer ads seem to be more enjoyable. And then that trade-off with the ads is interesting because then they shifted to being able to communicate more information and more change. So there's that trade-off where it's not necessarily that there's a silver bullet for your video ad. It's more in terms of what you're trying to do with it. You can have that repetition, that watchability, likability, a bit of a mixed bag. So if you're trying to do something that's maybe going to communicate more change, you might need that longer ad format. Now the best practices. So this is probably the part you've been all waiting for, right?
Yep.
Like if you have, yeah, I saw some blanks there. Yes.
So you look at those data you just showed are based on people who actually watched them in seconds, right?
Some of that was based on watching the ad, forced exposure with the ACE metrics panelists. And then they took a survey afterwards and also did some verbatims, and then we compounded all their responses to generate the scores and where those ads have their ad personality.
So it's not a bad, so if you clicked off after 5 seconds.
Yeah, the ACE data there, they had to watch the whole ad before they could answer the question. Correct.
But then the selection of the data was based on performance on Twitter's platform.
Which was natural.
So best practices. And then we're going to have a really good, I'll set it up for you, but you're going to have to pay really close attention here because I'm going to play 10 seconds of a video muted because I primarily work in Keynote. I couldn't make this great in the PowerPoint. So you're going to be really paying attention. Think of this as you're forced to pay attention because I'm standing up here with a clicker and a giant bright screen. But when we looked at our top, so we have top and bottom ads. So I'm not going to tell you very much about the bottom ads because no one likes to look at the bottom ads. That's helpful, but I'm going to really focus on what the good ads did well. So this is looking at those coded characteristics and the greatest difference we saw between our subset of bad ads and our subset of good ads. So 31 and 31. And where we saw the greatest difference was a hook, noteworthy, a celebrity, resolution of sequence, and I'm going to get more into what these all mean. Professional athlete, which is really just a subset of the celebrity, but it was kind of interesting to see where the athlete was part of that celebrity definition, and a resolution. Conversely, where we saw in some of our bad ads was slow to develop. It took over 10 seconds for something to happen in the video. And where we ended up going from these ads is looking at those top characteristics, it was almost that embarrassment of riches. Because they did a lot of these things together, and there was a lot of positive reinforcement in the video ad itself to make it work and be very effective. And as you can see, so hook, a lot of ads, they had the noteworthy visuals, they had a resolution, they had a celebrity, but that hook was a really powerful factor, and that was seen across almost all of our subset of really strong ads. Hold on. Gotta go back to get you ready for that. That was a teaser. So, like I said, this is gonna happen really quickly. Before it would click when I wanted it to click, but now it just does it when I advance the slide. So it's going to play muted for 10 seconds, and it's going to demonstrate one of these best practices. I need your attention. You guys online, look at it, please. And see, just, trying to look at this, if it actually does some of these things, if it actually draws you in and makes you want to more. Would it make you want to stop? Would it make you want to unmute it? Would it make you want to watch that whole video? You guys ready for this? Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah? Excellent. I got hard hearing, so that's what I got to ask multiple times. So if you didn't recognize that, that's Kenny Mayne, ESPN sportscaster, also does funny side reporting for the network. Obviously Steph Curry, and then doesn't quite get there in the first 10 seconds, but that's Del Curry, his dad, who was also a very good basketball player and proficient three-point shooter. And the rest of the ad sets up where they have a three-point shooting contest. But in that moment, would you agree that that ad has a hook? That there's something happening there, there's movement, there's people, there's things going on where you're like, okay, I can maybe be into this. Raise your hands. Agree that there's a hook there? Not everybody, or maybe those are like silent hands down people. I'll take those as tacit hands. That works well. But that hook happened generally in the first 10 seconds. And as you can kind of see in that video, there's stuff going on, there's motion. Now, the thing we've taken out of that is sound. So in general, if you've studied anything about attention, sound, motion, movement. So we take sound out of the equation. You have to have motion and movement. And that's some things that'll bring in that attention. And then you can do motion and movement through a variety of ways, but motion and movement, general research, sound, motion, movement are things that draw on our attention. If I was here and Horst was there and Horst was just standing like this doing nothing, and I'm doing all this, who do you think's where your eye's going to go? Probably on me. I would hope so. All right, so next ad. And then also, as I said, embarrassment of riches. Noteworthy, we have 3 celebrities, and there's a sequential resolution. Someone actually wins the 3-point contest. Question?
Yeah, what are you defining as the hook in the first 10 seconds?
The hook is captivating content that enthralls
people.
But I mean,
is the hook Steph Curry, or is the hook to cut together video?
The hook is kind of seeing, they're on a court, they're talking, there's something happening, and then we have cut scenes here where there's Kenny Mayne with this yet-to-be-revealed competitor. And then they were also watching these videos and sound on amongst the panelists and kind of seeing what was all happening there. I muted these just to have that effect of what we're all seeing right now on a lot of different platforms where you're not having audio play with your video. And then this was coded by 2 people, so they both agree that this was captivating content that would draw someone in. All right, so next one. It's going to play quickly. You may recognize this as Jaguar's Super Bowl commercial, but in terms of noteworthy, it's very cinematic. Obviously, because the Super Bowl commercial costs a ton of money, but it's cinematic. We have Ben Kingsley. We have that character actor who took the keys from her, who I forget his name, but he's been in a lot of different movies. And we're in a lair. We're on a tarmac. He's hopping off a plane. He's grabbing keys. It's just like, okay, something's happening here. So again, show of hands. Noteworthy? Like, is this something you don't see every day? Is this something that might stop you and say, I could watch that? All right, so this one, according to my man in the back, this one was coded a little bit easier, a little more easier to code, but once we all know you get into subjective coding, it's challenging. But over 6 out of 10 videos had these visuals that really draft you in. And they were unique, they were artsy, they were different, they were cinematic. It's just something you didn't see every day. So next one coming, quick. Shorter ad, 15 seconds. Who doesn't love a good manicure pedicure in the MasterCard pleasure suite somewhere? But this one, it's kind of this normal scene, all right? We have a little subtle branding talking about the suite, and they're just chatting. So you may be like, all right, I don't know if this is in. But then right about that 10-second mark, who pops their head in? Justin Timberlake. And you're like, oh, what's he going to do? And then it kind of actually ends on a cliffhanger. He sits down and they haven't taken their blinds off yet, so they never actually realize it. But you can kind of see that emotion that's going to build up. They're going to be surprised that Justin Timberlake crashed their mani-pedi party. Sequential resolution. I didn't give you the heads up, so this is a quick 10 seconds. Yeah, and there's fighting, there's a dog. It's actually a really good ad. I actually watched this. I had to watch these ads a lot. But, the dog's sad that his owners are fighting, and then he uses the Lenovo laptop or tablet that has a built-in projector to do a slideshow of all the happy moments, and then they get back together. And then there's that's that sequential resolution. And so that's hard where people are thinking that it's going to tell us, that has to tell a story. Like, what's a sequential resolution? But we really tried to boil this down to be more objective statements. So thinking of it more as a complete sentence, a complete thought. We're taking the person someplace. We're doing something. And this one, a long resolution, it's the story of their love and the puppy that joined them and then how the puppy brings them back together. But we have, again, that kind of hook bringing you in, and overall this longer video that has this sequential resolution. And again, about half of our videos feature this, not very much in our bottom videos. And then just to give you a sense here, again, I moved quick, but I hope you're watching this. Sequential resolution, just to give you that sense of it's a long story, this is 15 seconds, very quick. It's just that kind of complete thought, that full thing, that full visual experience that you're going to see. And just to spoil it for you, the truck makes it through Hell's Gate. I don't know where Hell's Gate is, but it makes it through there. But that's just because you hear sequential resolution, I think that can kind of push you a few different ways, but it can be very long, it can be a whole arc narrative, or it can really just be that complete thought where this vehicle gets through the Hell's Gate challenge using its amazing 4x4 structure wheels. And last one. Anyone recognize her? It's going to be a spoiler in a second, telling who she is. Anyone? Yeah, Mythbusters. Ah, see? So maybe not on the A list or A plus, but like B territory, depending on what you want. But recognize a celebrity, finance brand, personal finance that tells you how to boil eggs. So not maybe necessarily the most relevant to their brand, but what was really informative, these how-to videos, again, that sequential resolution, this is how you do it, but not something arcane or really, how to program the clock on a VCR, which many of you that really may not be relevant to, but that was a problem when I was growing up in the 80s. Never got the time right. But just showing that really helpful task where you can do things and learn how to do more. And these videos, again, not the most prevalent, not the most of all of our top performing videos, but a really easy tactic of defining some engaging video content where you can show something and inform your viewer. Then takeaways, and I hope I have not run over my 20 minutes of time with my gags, movements, and all that good stuff for you and doing all those wonderful check-ins. But what we learned is how do you make it easier for someone to stop and watch? How do you make it stopping power? And I think that's the simplicity of it is you just make it easy for them. You give them a hook, you engage them visually, and then you give them a reason to stick around to watch your whole video. What is going to be that sequential resolution? What am I sticking around to watch? What's going to be at this end of a minute that makes me want to stay here? What is happening in those first 10 seconds, potentially with sound on or sound off, but with motion and visuals and sights that's engaging, that's new, that's something I haven't seen. And then really make it easy to follow. So that hook, the visual engagement, and then a really complete thought, a complete sentence, something to make them stick around to watch the entire video. And potentially that's not your strategy. Maybe you're going to go I want someone to watch 30 seconds of this minute. Then think about staging it. What's that 30 seconds that you need? But really just making easy to follow, easy to hook, and engage visually. So thank you very much.
We're going to take questions for both the speakers at the end. So I want to kind of move ahead just in case people have to leave toward the end of the day. Horst at the beginning. Oh, by the way, I'm Mark Rappin with the ARF. Horst flew through some of the key findings. One of the other key things that came out of the ARF's original research is the importance of context. In the study itself, we had some contributions from Turner and Nielsen Neuro that looked at how integrating your message into relevant context really worked from a neural perspective. And that, of course, leads to native advertising and best practices. So I want to introduce David Utica of Yahoo to talk a little bit about native advertising and best practices. Prior to Yahoo, David also has experience with MTV and Major League Baseball. So welcome, David.
Thank you, everybody, and thanks to the ARF for inviting me to share the results of our latest research study. I'm going to start with a really quick quote from David Ogilvy. He talked about the best ads are really those ads that sell your product most efficiently without drawing attention to itself. And that really describes native advertising to a T. So if you really think about it, a lot of what Horst was talking about before in terms of device usage and cross-device usage applies to native advertising as well. I'm not sure, it seems like it's on the auto side. Because essentially, when you employ native advertising, you actually have the ability to have that sort of responsive design. So it can move from mobile to laptop to tablet in a very seamless fashion. So again, another reason why native has become so incredibly important. It really wants me to get to the agenda. So not sure why this is going fast forward. So really quickly, what we'll talk about today is give you guys some quick background, go through the objectives and methodology that we employ for this study. It's actually 2 studies that we're going to be sharing with you today. And then finally, we'll share with you those great creative best practices. The background, I'm sure many of you may have seen this. This is results from a Business Insider intelligence report. They actually shared this most recently. This may not surprise a lot of folks. This is looking at the percentage of total digital display ad spending, comparatively looking at traditional display versus native advertising. So I was really surprised to see that 56 and 44% number there, where native has really surpassed traditional advertising, especially when you think about it. So much of that is mobile-based, right? Mobile is really driving that sort of adoption for native advertising holistically. What surprised me was that in 5 years, it's going to be 74 to 26% split, or at least this is according to them. Again, I guess a lot of that has to do with how much we're all moving towards our mobile devices and this sort of what we're calling the smartphone dominance movement that's really encapsulated the entire world. Part of why native has really expanded as well is native video. And the native video format has been employed by those of us who include native advertising holistically within our offerings. 75% of those publishers are actually engaging with native video today. And part of the reasons, and another thing that Horst was mentioning before, is ad blocking. So native can be seen in many cases as an opportunity to avoid that ad blocking platform. As ad blocking becomes more and more prevalent, this becomes more and more important. This is from a TEED study in partnership with Research Now. They talked about looking at ad blockers today and looking at the types of ads that they find most intrusive. And it's clear that pre-roll is really the most intrusive ad for those ad blockers. And native video actually wasn't nearly as intrusive, although many people constantly talk about how native advertising may be more intrusive because it's within the stream of content. We found quite the opposite. So this brings me to my objectives. This is a very wordy slide. Essentially, we saw the world heading more and more towards this native-based platform. The advent of more cross-channel, cross-device world, advertising is becoming more amorphous. We wanted to take a really deep dive and understand. I think, of course, really hit it on the head in terms of talking about how creative plays such a hugely important role. Implementing creative with native advertising is extremely easy to do, but it's also extremely easy to get wrong. So it's really important to take into effect a couple of the creative best practices that we're going to be sharing with you. So in order to do so, we actually partnered with Nielsen and Nielsen Consumer Neuroscience to help us understand a couple of things. So we'll actually be sharing with you the results of 2 different studies. One was a native ad test, which we did in lab. We actually surveyed 800 people. We did a pre-post force exposure examination there. With the native video test, we actually increased the sample size to 8,000 people. So it was looking at significantly more people. And this, I should mention, is a series of creative best practices that we've been launching. So for CAN, we launched video creative best practices. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you want to give us a sort of your definition of native before you go on?
Sure.
Somebody, there have been some discussion about exactly how to define it.
The slides don't want me to do very well. So for native, the way that we describe it is an ad that seamlessly fits within the native stream of content. It really sort of fits within the content that surrounds it. So for us, native means search ads at Yahoo. It means native stream ads with our content streams both on Yahoo News and sports on the homepage. So things that seamlessly fit within the context of the content around it. And so, as I was mentioning before, we partnered with Nielsen, and we actually went in lab as well and did some eye tracking. Obviously, as we're talking about defining native advertising as something that's experienced in the contextual environment, we wanted to understand sort of visually how people were actually looking at the ad in comparison to everything else. So let's go right into the best practices. So the first best practice is around people-based imagery. I'm sure a lot of you have heard from a content perspective, when you have a face or a person, people's eyes really tend to gravitate towards another person's eyes. So if you have that imagery within a piece of content and a piece of advertising, we actually see the same results. You see there's a heavier amount of fixation percentage, and fixation overall, both on PC and on mobile, when you're actually showing a person-based image in relation to an object-based image. So the person-based image as well also delivers not just fixation, but that fixation then ultimately translates to things like brand familiarity, brand affinity, purchase increase, and recommendation increase as well. So logo presence, you'll see here, obviously, there's no logo here, there's a logo there. We compared the two, and logo presence was extremely important. It actually delivered heavy amounts of fixation overall on mobile specifically. When you have a smaller screen and a smaller ability to sort of make that impact, having the logo present definitely delivers those increases in fixation that you're looking for. And ultimately, it's not just about having the logo there, but it's actually about having a bigger logo as well. The bigger logo delivers higher aided recall, purchase increase, click intent, and share intent as well. You can't really see it here as well, but there's a very small logo here, which was not really seen. This is a much, much larger logo that's really covered with the heat map there.
You used eye tracking alone, you didn't use facial coding, just eye tracking?
We didn't use facial coding. And then when it came to native video, we actually saw something very, very similar. So we actually asked people, where should we start the ad? Should it be an object-based image or a logo-based image? And when you're starting your native video ad, starting with a logo actually helps increase things like enjoyment, message recall, both on mobile and on PC. The third best practice is around brand mentions. And so for brand mentions, we found a couple of interesting things. It's definitely not as important as logo presence. Logo presence trumps brand mentions for sure. But what we found is that brand mentions definitely did drive significant increases, especially within static image ads. I should preface this by saying that we actually tested native video, static image, app install ads as well within our native suite of tools. And those static image ads with the brand in the headline actually perform significantly better. Predictably enough, they perform better in aided recall, but actually those increases in purchasing increase and recommendation increase were really nice to see.
Mentioning that the presence of the logo and mentioning the brand, it has really positive effects on, for example, recall, purchase intent, things like that. Does it have any detrimental effects on likability or any other metrics?
No, it didn't.
There's no negative effects of the logo placement?
No, so the larger the logo says, we actually thought maybe there might be a negative placement with the likability. There wasn't. So anytime there was a significant difference with anything, we actually showed it, tried to understand sort of like what makes like the perfect logo placement. Specifically on mobile, and we say large logo, it's not like an obnoxiously large logo, but it's definitely a logo that's large enough for you to see, especially when we were showing the example before. When you have a tile-based website like we had with our magazine sites, it's really hard to sort of really engage consumers because there's lots of visualizations everywhere. So having that larger logo is extremely important. And then similarly enough with mobile, when you're sort of scrolling through a stream, having that logo placement there, especially within native video, having that pop up really first is extremely important because then you can actually make sure that you're aware and you recall, you're more likely to recall it.
Thank you.
And then interestingly enough, brand mentions in the headline were much more important than brand mentions in the body. So native advertising, essentially when you're creating a native ad, you really all you need is essentially if you're doing an image ad, a static image, some copy, a brand headline, you pop it into our system and it pops out an ad that is going to fit in whatever screen you put it in. It's really all mutual, it's responsive design. So it's really important for you to sort of think about where you want to put your brand mention. You don't want to your point, right? It sort of reaches a point where maybe it's too much. And so really including your brand mention within the headline is much more important and much more impactful than putting it within the body of the native ad. And so best practice number 4 is paying attention to labels. Now, native advertising is been somewhat controversial in terms of how people have referred to the fact that it's living within the stream. Having those really clear labels of transparency become extremely important. In this case, we tested the $ and the sponsored sign. For us at Yahoo, we actually put both in every single native ad unit that we employ. Part of that is because it's better safe than sorry. You really want to make sure that consumers are aware that they're engaging with an ad, that they're not engaging with content, because they're going to be more likely to be receptive as a result. That's sort of been the general frame of mind. What we saw here was actually quite interesting with specifically the mobile app install ad. With the mobile app install ad, I think people have become somewhat accustomed to seeing this. It's actually one of the first mobile ads that was made present in terms of the native format. So it's been so prevalent that I think people have become a little bit more permissive of this type of advertising. We saw that the $ actually sufficed when it came to it, $ versus a larger sponsored label. When you compare the $ versus sponsored, you actually see some increases in affinity, click intent, and share intent with the actual advertising. And for an app install ad, having an increase in click intent is extremely important, obviously. And there's actually a higher amount of total fixation as well. And again, I think that's partially because app install ads have been around for quite some time. People have grown more and more accustomed to it. It's also very clearly an ad, right? When you have an install button on that native stream, you really kind of come to know that it is an advertisement.
But are we sure that the viewers are recognizing the $ symbol as indicative?
Yeah, so we actually saw that they were fixating on the $ more than would the sponsored sign be there. So when we compared both, they were actually fixating on the $ and being aware that ultimately it was an ad. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where is the FTC? Like, FTC requires that you have sponsors, right? So if you replace it, you're replacing it with a $ sign, for example. Mm-hmm. And if you are, what's where's the FTC? Mm-hmm.
No, so we're not replacing, just to be clear. And that's why I prefaced that by saying that we put the $ and the word sponsored in front of everything. Yeah, we put both in front of all of our ads. The reason why I'm sharing this is because I think what this is showing is that eventually people are going to grow out of that. I think there's a lot of it has been this sort of we're really looking at the fact that we want to be extremely, extremely clear and transparent with our labeling. Labeling can be, and again, there's a $ for us. Other people use different, they just say the word ads. There's been lots of different sort of options that people use. By no means is it saying that we should sort of decrease the amount of transparency. It's just indicating that there's definitely a movement towards that in the future. Specifically with app install ads, it becomes something that people are a lot more permissive of. And so, to your point, when you look at a newer advertising like a native video ad unit, it's actually the polar opposite. People want more labels of transparency. Having that word sponsored becomes extremely crucial. And in fact, when you look at the results, it increased aided recall, it increased sponsored familiarity, increased with the sponsored unit as well. And part of that is because people understood that it was an ad and they felt more comfortable engaging with it. Again, it's because there was that much clearer label of transparency.
Do you do any research to ask whether there is a negative perception of the brand because of the mixture of editorial and ads?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was all part of this as well. So part of the test was brand familiarity, but it's also brand likability, recommendation, like recommend a brand, all those traditional brand metrics.
I'm not, from what I've read, the viewer is going to have a negative perception of anything. It won't be a brand, it will be of the publisher for mixing up editorial content. Mm-hmm. So do you have any data on that?
Not off the top of my head, but we've done a lot of research, especially when we started incorporating native into our stream. So we were one of the first folks that really went all in on native, especially on mobile. And we really didn't see any sort of detrimental degrees in terms of our usability. But we've done a lot of testing in terms of just how likely people were to click on it, especially on mobile devices with a much larger native unit that we have on our Yahoo native ad. Our app, I should say. It's a much larger unit, so we wanted to make sure that it was really clear. Labels of transparency has been something that we've tested a lot, which is why we ended out with like putting both in there to make sure that people felt comfortable. And the other thing I would say too is that through a lot of the research that we've been doing, sort of separate from this, is looking at younger generations and how folks have been really sort of permissive of advertising. Millennials are more than any other generation really, really permissive of advertising. They understand sort of the value exchange of, I need to watch an ad or see an ad in order to get content. And it's not to be said for like pre-roll ads and things like that, but when there's an additive value potentially, and I think when we were talking about some of the longer form content from my colleague over at Twitter and his results, we've seen some similar findings when you look at branded content. Because things like that served within a native stream perform really well because again, it's additive in nature.
It'd be interesting if you ever could do a stratified sample of people who are admitted ad blockers and people who are watching native and just ask if they prefer native. I mean, the chances are, you can't block any ads from native, but I think the perception would be probably more positive.
Oh, that was one of the, I think if you're referring to maybe like one of the first charts that I shared was looking at which they find most intrusive of pre-roll versus native video, and actually we found pre-roll way much more intrusive amongst ad blockers. Yeah, I totally agree. I think native gives us an opportunity to sort of combat, at least in these initial stages, that the ad blocking sort of wave that's coming. Thank you for your questions. We also tested native video ads and looking at lengths. We found across the board 15-second units drove greater recall, purchase intent than longer video units. We actually asked people as well, this is kind of like the Goldilocks question, and we saw that 10 seconds ads were too short, 15-second ads folks really felt were just right in length, and 60-second ads were just too long. Again, I would caveat that by saying 60-second ads may be too long, but I think when you have things like branded content or longer form content, which people are really inserting into these types of ad formats as a really great discovery mechanism, it's really sort of taking off. And ultimately, when you look at the percent difference between 15s and 30s, you see increases in aided recall, purchase increase, recommendation increase, and fixation percentages higher as well, both on PC and on mobile. So the interesting thing that we learned as well is this is best practice number 6, is looking at 10-second units, because we've heard a lot about 10-second units and what they drive. They're clearly not driving message recall. It's just maybe too short of a period of time to sort of deliver that entire message. But what they do is drive click-through rate. We actually measured click-through rate within this as well, and actually delivered a 4% increase versus 15 seconds, 17% increase versus 30s, and 56% increase versus 60s in driving click. So we basically think for a direct response advertiser, if you want to go into the realm of native video, which in many cases they haven't yet, a 10-second ad unit might actually be a good fit for you because you can really drive a message really quickly and really push towards clicks. The best practice number 7 is auto start. I'm sure if you guys had questions about the other ones, you'll definitely have a question about this one. Auto start being one of the more controversial pieces of technology, right, that we've employed with native video. So we tested autoplay and user-initiated videos. What we found was actually pretty interesting. It's supposed to go slower. So when you look at user-initiated ads, you see that there's some fixation here on the video. For the autoplay unit, it's some fixation as well, but there's actually more fixation on the content. That's the verbiage there, the copy within the user-initiated ad. When you fast forward to 7 seconds, however, with the auto start ad, there was more fixation, sustained fixation through 7 seconds for the autoplay ad versus the user-initiated ad. So I'm not sure what that says, but I'm pretty sure it means that there's sustained fixation with autoplay. And what we want to understand is like, what does that ultimately mean for a brand? There's a lot of, when we talk about the halo effect of this type of advertising, could have a negative brand impact with that brand. And what we found is actually pretty interesting. There's a higher aided recall, which makes more sense. You're being force exposed to the video unit, but you're more familiar with the ad. Again, makes more sense because you're being force exposed to the video unit. What was interesting is, though, it's a very small increase, but an increase nonetheless was with brand affinity. So there's an actual increase in brand affinity for the for the autoplay ad versus the user initiated ad. And again, we tested this across 4 different categories, so we're really trying to nullify for any sort of creative impacts there. So that was actually a really interesting learning that we discovered here. But really, I think, and I honestly think part of it is also similar to what we're talking about, the mobile app install ad. These sort of autoplay ads have been so much more prevalent across multiple sites and multiple platforms that I think there's a little bit more permissiveness that's happening as well. Best practice number 8 is professional video ads. So we compare professional video ads versus more amateur video ads. And amateur video ads I would define as something that's not as high quality, maybe shot on a cell phone or shot in a sort of less quality setting. Maybe the audio is a little bit less quality. Sometimes it's done a lot when you're starting to do like the street interviews, or you're trying to sort of do a little bit more sort of UGC-based video formats as well within your native video. And what we found is overall people enjoyed the professional video ad significantly more with brand familiarity, recommendation, message recall across the board. And interestingly enough, we actually found the same thing when we split the sample up by millennials and Gen Xers. So independent of generation, people were definitely looking at that. They really want me to move on to closed captioning. So closed captioning is best practice number 9. We actually tested looking at closed captioning within a auto start unit versus no closed captioning. Message recall was 60% higher for those who had experienced the closed captioning within the native video unit. So we really encourage people, I think, as a tip, to really have a call to action to really engage with the closed captioning, because it does help with message recall. In fact, those people that were exposed to closed captioning, they were much more likely to actually unmute the video as well, actually engage with it further. The final best practice, is the last one. We actually found this kind of organically with the test itself. We weren't setting out necessarily to look at call to action messaging or anything like that. We actually just looked at where people were looking. And as we looked at all these studies, all these ads that we tested, we actually found that there was a pretty succinct fixation on the more button on mobile native ads. Pretty much across the board, every single one that we looked at, people were really fixating on that more button. That tends to mean that people may be thinking about clicking on that button. Now, what we're basically saying is that specifically on mobile, it's really important to have a post-click mobile optimized experience as a brand. In many cases, we may not think about that. We might be buying the ad across different devices, sort of inserting it into the system very, very quickly, and not necessarily thinking about whether or not my post-click experience is going to be mobile optimized or not. And so I'll leave you with the list of all of the best practices. 1, people-based images. 2, don't shy away from letting your logos shine. 3, brand mentions do not have the same impact as logos, but definitely employ them, but only in the headline, not in the body. Best practice number 4, when it comes to labels, it's better safe than sorry. Definitely label more and increase that level of transparency. Best practice number 5, it's really no need to create too many ad lengths. It's really about 15-second units. They'll perform well. In fact, when we did the video creative best practice as well, we've learned 15-second units perform just as well there. So sort of appeases creatives that we talk to rather than having to create a 6, a 10, a 15, a 30, a 60. It sort of goes on and on. Best practice number 6 is really to drive traffic to your site. Use 10-second ad units. There is definitely a utility for those 10-second units. It's more for driving click-through. Best practice number 6 is don't be afraid to leverage auto start ads. They're totally fine. In fact, it could even increase your brand affinity if you're lucky. Best practice number 8 is to produce professional video ads when engaging with native video specifically. Best practice number 9 is to encourage users to use closed captioning. Actually increases that message recall and people are more likely to engage with your video further. And finally, have that post-click mobile optimized experience at the ready for your consumer. Thank you.
Thanks, David. We have a little time for a couple of questions. We already had a good debate during your presentation. maybe you want to take back on the Twitter data, what Matt presented? Any questions, comments?
I think we looked at sound, lack thereof sound, or a certain thing, or something to get the audience looking up again, like
We-
sound activation.
We didn't actually look at that, but it's an interesting point. We measured like sound activation as a variable, but we didn't measure any specific sounds, like what might draw people's attention more.
So we're doing a little bit more digging in with audio and on, audio off, because as we know that a lot of people have different definitions of what a view is, and some partners will say, well, a view for me has sound on. So we're still trying to explore that, and we're working pretty closely with Moat Analytics on that, but we don't have any definitive. But one of the codings we did was audio dependence, and that was actually a poor performing characteristic. And you really have to strategize for an auto-muted environment. And there was some interesting aspects I didn't get permission to share, but that closed captioning or subtitle, which helps. But if you have something very complicated happening that's relying on the voiceover, that's relying on the sound, assume that's not going to be played. And if that audio dependence is the key for your whole ad, kind of bringing in the viewer, chances are it's probably not going to be very effective.
One of those how-to ads or whatever, right? Would be tough if you didn't have something else pulling you in, celebrity or something like that, right?
Yeah. But there's definitely more to be done on that.
Any other questions? Actually, I do have a question. I was particularly intrigued by what you said about transparency and showing the logos. Now, I've seen some people talk about native advertising in the sense of advertising that doesn't even look like advertising. You have to look real hard. Now, would you call that native advertising? Is that also a form of native advertising in your understanding?
In terms of how transparent it would be, or whether
No, I mean,
an ad that looks that is almost trying to trick you into viewing it.
Would you also call that a native ad?
I would say that would be a tricky one, right? I think it's less native. It's more an article or a sponsored article at that point, right? I think it sort of depends. I think you really need to, as a publisher, go to lengths to ensure that there's clear transparency, because if you don't, I think to Jonathan's point before, you do lose your viewer. There's been a lot of, obviously there's the famous John Oliver rant in his show that talked about native and advertising. But I think if you're clear, people understand just a new way of advertising. As long as you're clear about it, people understand that it's just another way to sort of put product messages in front of you.
And do I interpret your data correctly when I say that what I think you also showed, like if you are transparent, you're more likely to have brand recall.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you're hiding your brand and your logo, then
people won't know. Yeah, I think if the more likely, if you're trying to trick people, you're just going to be less effective. You really want to be transparent, because people are okay with giving advertisements. They just need to understand that it isn't.
Take it from David. Sometimes good guys win. I think we're good.
Yeah.
So I want to hand this to Mark to give you some interesting information about upcoming events.
So we have plenty of refreshments out here. David and Matt and everyone will be around for more casual conversation if you'd like. So please stay around. Please have some alcohol. More fun without alcohol. We have a lot of things coming up. We have a very busy second half of the year. So if it's not already on your calendar, or if you haven't had a chance, I encourage you to go to the arf.org and look at upcoming events. But what we have around the corner is, if you're in San Francisco at the end of the month on July 27th, we're going to be talking about ad blocking, viewability, and ad fraud, and how those things are coming together, and what we as an industry should do about it. As a matter of fact, there's been a lot of discussion about how or whether the ARF should get involved, and we're really planning to have an interactive discussion to both talk about those issues and to have an open discussion about what the industry needs to do and whether the ARF should play a role in what the industry needs to do.
On Thursday, August 4th, we're going to talk about mobile research quality. So how you get the best information from consumers off the mobile device, kind of research on research, how you move from clipboard to handheld. We do a couple of things. Most of what we do, like today, talks cross categories for the industry as a whole. We have a couple of vertical-based efforts, and on August 10th, down in Soho, at a lovely venue with a great outdoor rooftop for the alcohol that comes after the content, we'll be talking about health and wellness. And interestingly, the last couple of health and wellness things that we did were pretty much about case studies with health and wellness. This is kind of flipping it around and saying that a lot of our OTC and pharma companies really only look at their consumer base from the condition first. And so this kind of recognizes that all of their patients are actually consumers first. And what kinds of things are going on in the cultural environment? What are branding best practices that consumers are exposed to that are going to help it? So if you do work in the health, wellness, OTC, pharma, CVS and Walgreens will be there. Please join us for that on the 10th. And then as I think Kåre said at the beginning, this is the first of the deep dive sessions. We're going to try to do one of these every month on our different topics. And the next one is going to be August 16th. That'll be on cross-platform. So again, same kind of format, about 5 o'clock, 5:30 here after work. We'll have a couple of speakers and some refreshments. So with that, thank you very much. Thanks to our speakers. Thanks to David and Matt. Thanks,